Today, we're going to talk about the most important thing when it comes to renting out real estate, and that is screening. Make sure all of your houses have screens because bugs getting into tenants' houses is the worst thing imaginable.
You know, I have a seething contempt for your sense of humor. I should probably note that. But anyways, my name is Andrew. This is Phil.
It's a good fun.
We are the Serious Brothers. We've been investing in real estate for 12 years here in the Kansas City area and managing properties. And as pretty much every property manager or landlord will tell you, tenant screening is about the most important thing you can do. If you do it right, that will help a lot. If you do it wrong, it will literally sink your entire business.
It's impossible to do rental real estate and do this wrong and have a successful business.
The thing is, these are large assets. You're not buying a little bit of stock all over the place. Every one of your properties is a very sizable asset. And in every unit, you only have one lease for that unit. I mean, generally speaking, I guess you can lease to other people. But yeah, it's not all or nothing, but it's big stakes with each one of these things you're doing. And getting the wrong person in there, it can be a disaster. It's better to have it vacant than to have the wrong person.
I've done a lot of screening for our properties, and the biggest mistakes I have ever made for our company is renting to people who cost us a lot of money. The biggest thing I've learned how to do properly is how to screen residents correctly, and I've cost us more money doing that wrong than anything else I've done.
It's kind of like with real estate investors looking at rehab budgets. They always end up adding more and more things, getting more and more careful, adding larger contingencies. No real estate investor makes the mistake of budgeting too much for rehab. I've never heard that. It's always like, it's always too little. It's the same with screening. Every real estate investor, every property manager that I know has increased their screening criteria. They've gone. They didn't start off like, we were too strict. We were too strict and we weren't letting enough people in. It's like, no, they're being too lenient. That's almost always
when you make that $25,000 mistake, which I have made, you learn quickly, and it is a definite gut punch.
I mean, we've had tenants destroy properties, put $25,000 of damage. We found one tenant who was breeding pit bulls. We've had
people yell at our staff and send racial epithets toward them, and just terrible situations that we've had to deal with. It's been bad.
It's not. And then of course people who don't pay their rent or
just the regulars, or just people who are generally difficult. Even if they do pay their rent and stay there, they're just not fun to deal with, and they hurt our sanity over time. Yeah. But I mean, it's one of the most important things. But the thing you can't do is expect people to change once they rent from you.
Yeah, they say a leopard doesn't change its spots. I don't think that's completely true. People do change, but it's a long process. It's a personal process. It's something you do yourself. People don't change because their property manager asked them to before they sign a lease. That does not happen. And unfortunately, the past is the best predictor of the future. And you, as a property manager, need to take that into consideration. It's really all you have to go
Now, it is not the perfect predictor of the future. This is all a scale thing. If you have perfect criteria, you will never find a resident. So you have to allow contingencies
Everyone makes mistakes.
Yeah, you're going to, go with an 820s credit score instead of an 810s credit. No, you have to have reasonable criteria. The more you let in, the more on average issues you're going to have. But if you have too strict of criteria, no one's going to be able to rent from you. If you have too loose of a criteria, you're going to get people who are going to generally cause problems. But the worst application could be a great resident. You don't know for certain. It's just low odds. And the greatest application could be someone who loses their job and their life goes, sideways and all of a sudden causes problems. So it's not a predictor.
We had great residents who fell apart from COVID and just kind of disappeared.
Honestly,
things
I do
happen.
have one really sad story. We had a really great resident who was doing great, had a great background. They were renting from us great for a long time. She blew off her fingers during the 4th of July, and then her whole life went sideways after that. Otherwise, she was great, but that just caused a downward spiral.
On the other hand, a property that we owned but weren't managing, we had a separate property manager. One of the ladies, her baby daddy came there, and he was wanted by the police, and they had a police standoff in front of the building. So, I mean,
always
back up!
You have both things, and I think generally speaking, you have to go with the odds. This is in a business mindset, you go with the odds, and that is through thorough screening.
Now, there is a very important concept we have to get out of the way.
The overarching...
Yes, and that is fair housing. Don't be terrified of fair housing, but take it seriously. It's important. You have to understand this if you're going to do rental real estate.
There are 7 categories you cannot discriminate against: race, color, religion, sex, disability, familial status, like whether they're married or single, how many kids, and then national origin. Now, a couple quick notes on that, like familial status, if they have like 12 kids, there's still occupancy limits.
Yes.
Like usually 2 people per bedroom is the maximum. So if you have a 2-bedroom
Although I think
apartment,
those are local ordinances.
yeah, it's usually local. You don't have to rent to somebody who has 7 kids just because the occupancy requirement, of course, check with an attorney and whatnot. Some states also have further requirements. Missouri, we're located out of, you can't discriminate against ancestry. I'm not even sure how you would do that, but you can't discriminate against ancestry. But I think the general thing is, don't fear fair housing. What you need to do is understand it, and basically, one, don't discriminate.
It's not a good idea to anyway.
Yeah,
it's not going to help you.
It doesn't help. And then second, document. You should have like each thing, like you're saying, if it's not in Rent Manager, which is our property management software, if it's not in Rent Manager, it didn't happen. Every decision you should make should be documented. Your policies, your criteria as best as possible should be laid out in advance. And at that point, I mean, the odds are in your favor.
Mm-hmm. Now, if you're following the spirit of fair housing, I don't think you're going to get in a lot of trouble. Some people who talk about it will say, if you don't do things perfectly, you're going to get hammered. I don't think that's really true. But also the problem with it is it's a situation where you kind of have to be able to prove your innocence rather than to, prove you're not guilty, which is kind of impossible to do.
It's tricky to prove you didn't discriminate because it's what went on in your own
head. You legally can discriminate against someone who smokes, for example, but you can't prove that you're discriminating against a smoker and not someone who has,
and it is probably like disparate impact things, and so I would just recommend against it.
Yeah, just don't do those kind of things.
I think you can discriminate against occupation, but that I definitely wouldn't recommend. Yeah, except for criminal.
So
you might discriminating against criminals.
Now, again, you need to have a written policy for how you do this, but it is a little bit more complicated than just say we do this and we don't do this, because there is always weird situations. We kind of go with a red flag, yellow flag system, where red flags will basically make it so people cannot get approved.
That's an automatic no.
Yes.
Like you're an axe murderer. Axe murders are a red flag.
And yellow flags are things that we will kind of look into. But if you have 4 people apply and one has a good credit score and one doesn't have any rental history and one has a good job and none of the others, these situations never fit together perfectly.
Most people, especially most people applying to be a tenant, have at least one yellow flag. I mean, I think most people in general have at least a yellow flag. Something went wrong somewhere somehow, and so yellow flags add up. Eventually, you get thrown into the penalty box. Or am I mixing up hockey and soccer right now?
But anyways, the first thing to do, get an application from everybody over 18 who's going to be living in the property. Make sure to do that. I would always recommend to get an application fee as well from them. If you have free applications, you're going to get a lot of nonsense coming.
We tried it once, and I have never. I don't even know how you get that many felonies. Like, should you just be a prisoner?
Also, if you bring in more people who are less qualified, you're going to have a lot more people hit your minimum qualifications when you want people more hitting higher on your.
You want to tell people your qualifications on the phone. They sort themselves out if they have a recent eviction. They don't waste your time in theirs. Don't tell them not to apply, though. That is against not tell people not to apply.
Steering, yes.
But at the same time, you should tell them what your qualifications are. Yeah. And you should have those written down. And again, we're going to go into more specifics here of what we do. But remember, it doesn't have to be exactly the same. Yeah. Make sure you are always doing the same thing. That's the key thing with fair housing, too. Don't discriminate. Write down your policies and do the same thing over and over and over again. Mm-hmm. It's a template. It's a mold.
Honestly, the best thing, how I do it is I don't even know who is applying. I just look at the sheet and go off of that. But there's 5 things we look at when we screen a background. And they are civil history, criminal history, rental history, employment history, and credit history. And I'll go over these more specifically. Yeah. First, civil history. This is basically, have you been evicted before? Have you been to eviction court? Has anybody filed an eviction on you?
This is the biggest one.
Yeah, I would say this is the one you want to avoid the most. Well, depending on the next one.
Depending on
the other one can get pretty bad. But
the axe murder red flag. Yeah.
But in general, this is the one. If someone's been through an eviction before, my general answer is no. Now, really, you're only allowed to go back 7 years on criminal and civil history. So we basically say within the last 7 years. But if someone has an eviction, we basically are going to say no, thank you. Yeah. Because if they're willing to go through an eviction once,
there's almost always a way out. Either just agreeing to leave, cash for keys, whatever. So somebody willing to go all the way to the end of the eviction or not willing to work with you in that in any respect, just disappearing. I think that's unfortunately
Yeah.
You know,
That's an absolute just red flag for us. We do not allow any both eviction history. And someone who's gone through one eviction is much more likely to be willing to go through the second one, and hopefully that's not with you. The second one is criminal history. This one could be the worst if you see the 7-time axe murderer. That's probably not someone you want to rent to. Speaking of which, we do not allow any violent felonies.
6 is okay, though.
Any violent felonies for any reason. We don't want to put our staff into those situations if they're living next to neighbors. We just don't want to deal with that kind of stuff. Generally, any felonies we do not let into our properties either. The one exception we do sometimes make is if there's a felony DUI or DWI. Different states deal with those differently. I don't feel like, if you had a DWI 6 years ago, that necessarily means you can't ever rent again. But it is a big issue because it was a very bad judgment call at the time. It also might mean they might make bad judgments in the future.
It's a big yellow flag, but it's still a yellow flag.
Those can really kind of derail people's lives as well. So, that's definitely a big issue. Misdemeanors, those won't necessarily make it so you're not going to be approved. But if you have a lot of misdemeanors, it means you're kind of comfortable.
You're riding the line.
Yeah, you're not obeying authority. So, and in terms of a lease renter relationship, the landlord is the authority. If they're not going to deal with authority, well, that's an issue too.
One misdemeanor is a yellow flag. Multiple is a red, especially if they're like really recent. Or if they're old, that's different.
There are some misdemeanors that are pretty rough too. And now there is a thing that's been going around about how you're not allowed to discriminate based off of criminal background and stuff as well. And what that means you're doing. I would just talk to a lawyer about that.
Some states are harsher about that than others, or some states require some sort of explanation as to why this is an issue, or some sort of leniency,
or you have to hear them out on terms of why the situation
in ways you could conceivably deal. Again, this is lawyer talk to stuff, but conceivably deal with this is no felonies over 10 years old, or all misdemeanors need a written explanation or something. Various things along those lines.
Now, when it comes to the next one, rental history, we require at least 1 year of positive rental history. That's actually kind of probably close to a minimum standard, I would say. We would love to require more, but a lot of times people rented their last place for a year and they can't get the rental history from the previous place they were at. And so that can kick out a lot of positive residents if you do require more than that. That's why we have that standard. But I really would love to have more, but we'd kick out too many positive residents if we did that. And what do we mean by positive rental history? Because that has a different distinction. Basically, what we say is no more than 1 late payment per year of renting. So if you have 3 roommates who are all moving in together, one has 1 year of rental history, another has 3 years of rental history, and the other doesn't have any. That means if they have less than 4 late payments on the rental history, we will approve them. If they have 5 or more, we won't. Also, we take complaints and violations and things like that into consideration as well. If they have 20 complaints from their neighbors being too loud, that's probably not who we want to rent to either. So 1 year of positive rental history for the group. The next one is employment history, which this one, it kind of depends on your market a little bit here.
Generally, we want to be 3 times the rent and income. But if you're going to some places like, say, Manhattan, that's not going to work. And also, there are some places have laws and legal requirements. I think in Manhattan, don't quote me on this. I know it's a YouTube video. I could have researched it, but we're lazy.
We're not into New York.
I think it's 2 times the rent is the maximum you can do.
Fake news.
So check the laws on that, but we do 3 times the rent and income.
In verifiable income too. This has to be above the table, taxable income that they can show, and it needs to be verified in a legitimate way as well. We don't take
if they're slinging records on the street corner and they're about to hit their big break. They're a construction worker, but all they're taking money. It's all cash payments or even Venmo and stuff like that. If it's not reliable, typical, above board income, we're not going to count it regardless of what you say about it. The last one was one that I used at least a year of
well, yes, that's true too. If someone just started a job, that's a total yellow flag thing. And it's probably the smallest yellow flag that we have. I generally want to see people with stable lives, stable employment.
But at least a year of employment history.
Correct.
So
yes. So that is something we look for as well. It will not look good if you just got your job for the first time because we don't know if you're going to be able to keep that job. The last one is credit history. And this is the one that I used to neglect a lot more than I do now. I used to think credit history just means how much you care about your credit. But it really also depends how well your life is put together in a sense.
And how important it is for you to pay your bills and how well you can, plan out your expenses and things like that.
Basically, anybody with a credit score under 500, we don't allow. If it's above 600, generally, we will. That's kind of
fast.
Usually, although we will look into it. Sometimes you can have higher than 600 with a bankruptcy. Sometimes you can have a car repossession that just happened.
Yeah.
Sometimes you can have a lot of issues and still have that high credit score. I actually saw someone who didn't pay a bunch of utility bills with a 620 credit score or something, and we didn't allow that.
Right in the line.
If they're not paying their utility bills, that's an issue too. Where we really look at it really closely and dig down on what's going on is what's between 5 and 600. I've gotten much more strict on that. We've changed our criteria over the years because I've noticed those people in that range are not as good as performing on their leases as the people who are above 600. So we've gotten much more strict on that over the years.
There are other things I've heard of property managers and landlords doing. I think they're kind of riding a line. You should be very careful if you're going to consider this. Probably talk to an attorney, like checking people's Facebook accounts, driving by their property that they currently live in, seeing what kind of condition it's in.
Yeah.
We don't do any of that stuff. You can, that's, if you want to look into that, I talk to an attorney. But I say our general record is we get about 50% approvals.
Yeah, I would say. I think it's gone up a little bit recently because we've done better pre-screening. But I would say about half.
And that is with pre-screening, telling people what our criteria are ahead of time. You still have people who are not there. And then you have some tricky issues. You have, roommates living together where one has, a felony, the other three are good. And you kind of tell them
we don't want the axe murderer living with the three of you, basically. No.
And of course, as much as fair housing wants to be absolutely perfect, when you have all of these, what their credit is not that good, but they have a good rental history, good employment history, you've got to kind of add up the number of yellow flags you have and just is it too many? And make the number that you want and the size of them. But I think the key thing is having those red flags there, knowing where the flags are, and especially knowing where the red flags are, because those are the key ones.
How do you actually run the screening? I would say use a professional company. We use a company called Red Star. We really like them. I would find a professional company. Honestly, don't try to do it yourself on this one. I think you're just going to cause more problems.
I think there's a tendency to want the application to be passed. You want to fill up the property. Yeah. Especially don't give this task of screening somebody to the person who's also responsible for leasing it. Because you have that psychological want to lease it, so you want to approve them, so you're going to be biased in their favor instead of just seeing it, the plain facts of day from a third party. Also, this is where the application fee goes. You're not just pocketing it.
Yes.
You're using it's usually we just charge what is required for the
we actually lose money on it generally.
Yeah, and so we get some complaints sometimes. They only want the application fees. We're actually losing money on this process. We are paying. We're both basically contributing to this application.
But I would have a third party run it all, and you just look at the report and make your decision based off of the facts there and kind of move forward. There are some other situations you can do with people who aren't qualified that you can get qualified. Specifically, you can use co-signers or last month's rent. I'll talk about last month's rent briefly. I generally say probably don't do that if they're not good enough or qualified enough to rent the property as is. An extra month's rent is not going to pay for the $10,000 a day, which is the wrong.
Generally speaking, the last month's rent, in my judgment, is something for starter apartments, and you can have different criteria for different properties.
True,
but you just need to be written. They need to be written. Okay,
yes.
But is generally for these somebody who doesn't have a bad history, but doesn't have much of a history. They just started a job.
And the little history they have is good. And they don't have anything bad on there. And we do this for our starter apartments that aren't very expensive. We feel like in general, just like someone who doesn't have someone backing them up with a co-signer, there has to be some entry-level place for them to rent before they have any really positive history and stuff like that. A co-signer is the other one. Mostly this will only take on situations where people don't have employment. So like they're a student, they don't actually have income, and their parent is co-signing saying, hey, they will get their rent paid, and I'm basically putting my income on the line.
These are very important for student rentals. Yeah. Basically somebody else is also responsible for that person's lease. And if they don't pay, you can go after the other person as well for the
or if they don't have any rental history at all, a co-signer is a situation where we'll do that with. But we won't have a co-signer make up for the criminal history or the civil history. It's really just for the lack of history, not negative history is really what it will make up for.
I would say in conclusion, the key thing to keep in mind here is that you want to get the right person even if it takes longer. a vacant property is better than a property that is leased to the wrong person. And so lean in the direction of more screening than less. Go through those different categories. Make sure that your criteria is written down, that you don't discriminate, you're treating everyone the same, you're looking for the same things, and try to be as consistent as possible when you're doing that. Now, even still, sometimes you're going to have things go awry. You're going to have people not pay. You may even have to do an eviction, unfortunately, as much as we hate that. And so as far as to how to deal with collections and those unfortunate evictions, please check out this video here. And also
subscribe, because screening your houses is the most important thing. No bugs in your houses.
So subscribe and forget what he just said, and please watch this video here right now. Thanks.